Welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This week, the portion of Lech Lecha. This is Series 2, Episode 3. We are live on location in Boca Raton, Florida. Our topic this week, conflict resolution. The relationship between Abraham and Lot is super interesting. Abraham and Lot have a long history together. They spent many years together. They've experienced a lot. And Lot, as a character, is what one might call a supporting actor. It's a topic we've discussed briefly a couple of times in Season 1 of Coaching with the Bible, where the Bible has these other personalities and characters who appear and then disappear and sometimes appear again, but more often than not don't. And there are simply vignettes and little stories about them where we learn a tremendous amount of deep and important lessons about life. And Lot is one of those. He's like a fly on the wall. He might be what you would call a watcher, to use a term, in the sense that he, till this point, has experienced everything with Abraham. He's a close member of the family. In fact, according to the commentaries and what we understand from the text, he is Sarah's brother. So he is deeply connected to the family. And according to the commentaries as well, he and Abraham appear to look alike, in the same way that's described later on, that Isaac and Abraham look alike, Lot and Abraham look alike. So it's not just simply a familial relationship and kinship. There's a deep, deep connection between the two. And Lot is there. He goes with Abraham from their home. He travels. He traverses the paths. He goes to the land of Canaan with him. He goes down to Egypt with Abraham and Sarah. He comes out of Egypt with Abraham and Sarah, and he benefits from having been around Abraham. Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, known as the Netziv, who we mentioned before, says that Lot becomes a trusted advisor of Abraham, and because people are seeking out Abraham for advice and for inspiration and motivation, Lot is present and he provides insight to people and provides advice to people, and he benefits financially from it. And ultimately, as the verse tells us, as we get into the, I think it's the 13th chapter here, Lot also has riches. He is also wealthy. And so the first time where Lot is an active player, let's say, in the story is in the 13th chapter, when a fight breaks out between the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot. It would seem that simply it's just a territorial thing. There isn't enough room in the land for these two sets of shepherds to work and to live together. Now, if you've been in the land of Israel at any point, even in the desert areas where shepherds roam, there appears to be enough room for more than two families to operate there, and perhaps there's more going on under the surface, and the commentaries do go into that, and we'll get to that in just a moment, but there's a conflict that arises here. And it's interesting to appreciate not only perhaps what the conflict is, but the manner in which Abraham manages and handles that conflict, and then to sort of understand a little bit about conflict resolution, and perhaps what we call quick conflict resolution, without having the opportunity to go all the way and to explore and to go to the great depths of conflict resolution, which typically speaking takes more than one instance. But here in this moment, a quick action of conflict resolution that Abraham takes. And so let's sort of discuss it a little bit further. It seems to me that there's argument between them. The commentaries say that the argument is more than simply about that there isn't enough room. It's just a question more of where the shepherds are allowing the sheep to graze. And the idea that Lot's shepherds believe that Lot is the heir apparent to Abraham's legacy because Abraham has no children, that seems to be the case where the fight begins to erupt. Abraham's shepherds are aware that perhaps it's true that ultimately the land will become Abraham's. It isn't now, and so therefore the act now of herding the sheep anywhere is some act of theft. And so there is a deeper, perhaps moral conflict going on here among them. And that's when it comes to, in the 8th verse, it comes to a head and it now appears before Abraham. And he has to decide how this is going to play out. And this is where it gets super interesting. And it's important to sort of really pay attention to the language that he uses. I want to appreciate here in this moment before Abraham speaks, let us stop the tape for a moment and insert ourselves into this space. It's coming to Abraham. He is not an impartial party to this argument. These are his shepherds. These are his sheep, along with Lot. This is family. It's deep. It's an immediate family member. It's a brother-in-law. It's someone who has been with him for years. At the same time, Abraham knows what God has told him about the land becoming his, about the promise, about the covenant, about all that stuff. He's aware of it. He's also very mindful and aware of the fact, apologize for the phone ringing in the background here. He is mindful of the fact that there are other nations around and people are paying attention to him. He knows that people know who he is. He was just in Egypt. He's now going to fight a war in the next chapter. People know him. And so he is mindfully taking all those factors into consideration as he's about to speak in verse 8. And watch what he does. The first thing he does is he pours cold water on the entirety of the fight, calms the masses, immediately is looking to seek peace and resolution. There shouldn't be a fight between us, he says, or even a fight between our shepherds. We are brothers. Powerful. So immediately he goes right to the familiar relationship. Immediately he connects back personally. He goes to the what you would call common ground, as a lot of the people like to talk. There's common ground there, and he connects with Lot in common ground that they are brothers. He sees them as brothers. We are family. The next thing he does, I think, is super interesting. He promotes a solution to the conflict very quickly, with the manner in which that solution comes out, that resolution will come out, will be determined by the other party. It's a super interesting approach. He says, all the land is before you. Where you go, you decide to go, I'll go the other way. Important, Rabbi Berlin comments there that what Abraham offers is not simply that you'll go and I'll stay. It's that wherever you will go, I will go in the opposite direction. It's not simply that I will be in a different place than you. I will also move. And so you will make the decision, Lot. You will decide how this plays out. And I'm good, Abraham says, with however you decide to do that. The choice is yours. He puts it and lays it at the feet of the other party. And he sounds like it's as if he is comfortable with where that's going to be. And sort of in the sense of conflict management and conflict resolution, he's willing to collaborate here, and he's willing to not compromise, because it's not so much a compromise. He's not seeking where one person wins and where everyone gives in a little bit. He's seeking to collaboratively come to a solution, which is what's called the holy grail of conflict resolution. And so Abraham puts it into Lot's hands to decide what's going to be, how it's going to play out. And Lot looks around. This is the first time Lot is an active player. He doesn't speak. He's an active player in the stories. In other places, he's in attendance. He's there. He's watching. He's paying attention. He's experiencing what's going on. Here he's doing something. And so in verse 10 is the first time he's doing something. It says that he looks with his eyes and he sees the entire area of the Jordan Valley, and he decides that's where he's going to go. So in verse 11, that's where he goes, and he separates from his brother, the end of the verse 11. He separates from upon his brother, from Abraham he leaves. It turns out that Abraham doesn't actually have to move at that point. That's just a simply side point. But Lot is the active player. Lot imposes the solution to the conflict, and it's over. What's also interesting to appreciate is that they preserved the relationship. Because when the Bible tells us in the next chapter that Abraham goes to war, the only reason he goes to war, according to the Bible, is to rescue his brother Lot, his family member Lot, who was taken hostage in the course of the battle. And there's a singular focus Obviously, as we talked last year about the idea of believing passionately, and Abraham is always looking for moments to promote and to put God forward and at front. But the particular reason that he is brought into that war, that he is fighting that war, is to free his brother Lot. The verse there does use the term again, that it's his brother. So he preserves the relationship. It's like the ultimate conflict resolution success. There's a conflict. They immediately hit to what the issue is. They avoid allowing the conflict to persist or to metastasize in any single way, shape, and form. There's a solution that is put forward. The party, in this case, I think to some degree, Lot would be viewed as the weaker party or the lesser party of the two, is given the space and the opportunity to decide how that's going to play out. They both accept that resolution. They part ways, and yet they're still able to preserve the relationship long term. Yes, from different locations. Yes, they no longer live together. Yes, I'm sure that is hard, but it works. And so that is an incredibly quick and beautiful example of conflict resolution. And so the story of conflict resolution is really important because the truth is, people spend a lot of time on conflict resolution. People spend a lot of time in their workplaces, and their homes dealing with conflict. We prefer to avoid it, and we prefer not to avoid it entirely, meaning not to avoid the conflicts, but to avoid that conflict ever come into place. And we can do that by having a more open space and having sort of alignment around issues and ideas and having communication among ourselves. But the truth is, a research study was done last year in 2020 that said people on average, workers, not even leaders, but workers spend an average somewhere near 3 hours a week dealing with conflict. And when they figured out the math of that, I'm not sure how they figured out the math, it's somewhere like $350 billion in pay that's being spent on conflict resolution in a work environment. So it's there, and we have to clarify things, and we have to get to spaces where we can avoid the conflict. But once there is a conflict, we have to step in there and figure out how to resolve it. We cannot let it fester. We cannot let it metastasize. We cannot let it overwhelm our entire world. And so it's really important in terms of appreciating how to resolve conflict is first appreciating how to understand the conflict. First is really finding the root cause by asking the right questions, by speaking to the right people. Again, it's not an attempt at choosing sides or deciding the right and the wrong. It's more of a question of determining exactly what is the issue, getting to the point, the inflection point between the two sides in the conflict, and therefore the ability to then come to some sort of a resolution. So you get there by asking the right questions, you get there by speaking to the right people, you get there by keeping people aligned and appreciative of who they are and where their roles are and understanding how that fits, asking the right questions of each person, how they feel aggrieved. Open-ended questions is really important. We do this a lot in coaching. We're talking about asking questions. We don't ask a question that's very direct and very on point. People feel sort of taken aback by them or that they're offended by them. We want people to have the ability to tell a story. We want people to describe and add details to what's happened. And so we ask more open-ended questions. It's to sort of like, what happened here? Can you describe for me what happened here? Can you describe for me what it is that you feel happened in this situation? Can you describe for me how you feel based on what happened? Giving people the space to really explain. And then very importantly is to really have the people that are affected by the conflict to get involved in the conflict resolution. Not in the sense that they get to all have a say in the solution perhaps, but really the idea here is that once there's sort of an approach towards resolution, that we have all the players involved so they can all participate and be part not just of the conflict, but of the solution and the resolution and the forward into the future of what's a better circumstance and situation. So what's really great, I came across this wonderful approach on conflict management. It's the Thomas Kilmann conflict management theory. And it describes sort of on two axes the idea of assertiveness and cooperativeness, that the two factors for great conflict resolution are assertiveness and cooperativeness. Assertiveness on the y-axis and cooperativeness on the x-axis. And then in there, they describe 5 different approaches to conflict resolution strategy, which are really important. The first, the upper left-hand corner. So if you can think about that, what that is, that would be very highly assertive, but very uncooperative. And so in there, basically, it's called competing. You're trying to win and beat the other party. It's for volatile circumstances and situations where you need an immediate resolution. We have a very tough person in place who's going to impose a resolution, and you're not looking for cooperation. And the person is exceptionally assertive. That's not the Holy Grail. We'll skip the Holy Grail for just a second because we talked about it before. Number 3 would be compromising. Compromising sits smack in the middle. So it's equal parts assertiveness and equal parts cooperativeness. You're seeking the middle ground. Each person in the conflict gives, each person in the conflict gets. The person trying to get to the solution is focusing on the wins of each, but you're also mindful of the fact that when people compromise, they're also not winning. And people sometimes don't appreciate compromise. They might do it, they might accept it, but they don't accept it willingly or happily. And so be mindful of, in that space, when you're compromising, that more conflict could result as in the future, and that it stems back to the original conflict. The bottom left, which would be the least assertive and the least cooperative, which is avoiding, called avoiding. You're hoping it goes away. We know that it doesn't. We know that if we avoid the conflict, it festers and metastasizes and becomes even far worse. It rolls into other things, and then we wonder why we had this argument, fight, and issue in the first place, and we cannot get to the root because we simply can't find it. At the same time, there are cases where conflict can be avoided. If it's trivial, if it's small, if it's really nothing, if we really feel like as we review it and think it through, that on the other side of that, there's no benefit in trying to resolve it, it's just going to resolve itself, then we can impose what was called, a great term, masterly inactivity, and sort of mind the conflict and do nothing about it. It's a wonderful term. We can go into it. I think we mentioned it last year once as well. And the last one is called accommodating. It's the bottom right, where you're super cooperative and you're the least assertive, which is the idea sort of peacekeeping and of giving in. And when you're thinking more in the long term that if me giving up here and giving in here costs me nothing, and allowing the other person to win, so accommodating here might be your best approach to resolving the conflict. It allows you to preserve the relationship. So when you think about Abraham, he is somewhere in the mix of these, in the sense of collaborating, which is the Holy Grail, where you're the most cooperative and you're the most assertive. He sort of splits in there. It's not compromise what's going on here. It's certainly not competing, and it's certainly not avoiding. It's some sort of mix of collaborating and accommodating. Avram was willing to cede ground. Abraham is willing to give space. He's willing to allow the other party to make the decision. But he's also the one who is putting it in place. He's also the one who is promoting a certain approach to the solution. And so to some degree, Abraham imposes or employs, is a better term here, a very powerful and very crucial set of conflict management strategy and skill in the manner in which he handles the relationship with Lot. And so that's what we have to do and work on here, is the ability to think through the conflict, to think a little bit like Abraham, to consider all the parties involved, to get to the root of the conflicts that are going on in our lives, whether it's between our children, between spouses, employees, partners, colleagues, whatever it is, and go to the heart of it, figure out what the best approach is to the resolution, put a resolution out there, and then follow through with that resolution to ultimately see that the conflict is no longer there. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Look forward to seeing you next week.